institute is in Jerusalem. And it was built by the Schusterman Foundation, who are situated in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the United States, who are looking for something. Is this working? Oh, now it's working. Who are looking for some way to invest in abused children in Israel. And they built a training institute. And it started in 2007. It was me with a backpack on my back, seriously, a backpack with a laptop on my back. We had no office, no anything, and we started building training programs for any kind of professional who might work or be in contact with children who are maltreated. One of the things that I did is that around in 2009, we were looking for a way to get on the map. We wanted to be able to be considered a very important and good institute. So Alicia Lieberman from San Francisco came to Israel to talk about early childhood trauma and about her intervention, which is called Child-Parent Psychotherapy, or CPP. And we asked her if she would be willing to train it in Israel. Now, Alicia's father, she had got her bachelor's degree in Israel, and her two sisters, and at that time her mother, all lived in Jerusalem. So it took her maybe 7 seconds to say, yes, I want to teach it. And we said, yes, and we started teaching CPP. And I'm going to tell you about what we're doing, what it is, and what we're doing. It is a very well-known evidence-based practice in the United States. I don't think I'm going to be teaching anybody anything about it who lives in the United States, who works there. But it is new here. And we've now had 6 cohorts altogether. We're teaching the 6th course now. And we have about 120 clinicians, I think, that are either have learned it or are learning it. The second thing I want to talk about is safe care. Safe care is also a very well-known evidence-based intervention for early childhood as well, that was built by Don Lutzker at Georgia State University many years ago. It started as a different program and turned into Safe Care. And it's a home-based program that therapists do not provide, rather paraprofessionals do it. And I'm going to tell you about them both. They both were brought here because they were supposed to fill a gap that we didn't have in Israel. One thing that we did not have in Israel, and I'm saying this in Haifa, so I'm a little scared right now, was an evidence-based, trauma-focused intervention that is dyadic for young children. In Haifa, the Beit Sefer Haifa'i, or the Haifa School of Dyadic Treatment, is very prominent in this country in general. It's also a relationship-based intervention. It isn't trauma-based, and this is different. It's different, and it's also taught often to people who do not have a background in dyadic treatment, which is very interesting because the dyadic people here in Israel, like, they never would consider seeing a 4-year-old without his mother or father in the room. But now when we study CPP, some people are doing it for the first time. So I'm going to talk about both child-parent psychotherapy and safe care, and also tell you a little bit, if I have time, about the dissemination process, how we brought it over and what we did with it. Okay? So the first thing I'm going to talk about is CPP. I'm just going to tell you what it is. Okay? It's a dyadic intervention for children up to age 0 to 5. I would say, when we teach it, we say the child has to be 6.0 aged when you start. And then they bring a 7-year-old, and we say, what is it about 6.0 that you don't understand? It's for preschoolers. The reason we insist on it is because that's what it was studied for. Its efficacy was based upon studies of children that are preschoolers, that have undergone familial trauma, okay, which can include death of a very close relative, especially a parent, but not only brothers and sisters often as well, severe family illness or illness of the child, abuse or neglect, exposure to domestic violence, accidents, natural disasters, and armed conflict, which we are not strangers to in Israel. We brought it because we were the Haruv Institute, because we were thinking about the part about abuse and neglect in particular. Okay, and exposure to domestic violence, which I consider one of the worst kinds of abuse, basically, to children. It's still not considered in Israel to actually be a form of child abuse, but we consider it to be so. It's a dyadic intervention, always with caregiver and child together, and it usually lasts around a year. A year meaning, I think that their average is 32 sessions, which takes away from, spring break, Passover, summer vacation, and all the things that people do, although it's also used for shorter periods of time. It is based on the premise that trauma harms 3 main areas of of children's lives. The first being their ability to learn and develop. Okay, we know that trauma is often very much confused with many other diagnoses. The biggest one being ADHD. Okay, but there are others as well. ODD. I'm not even sure if ASD isn't confused, is a differential diagnosis to PTSD often. Okay, the ability to maintain healthy relationships. Okay, trauma really affects relationships with parents because it really kind of shatters the defensive shield that parents have to their children to make their life safe, and the ability to self-regulate. Okay, CPP relates to all three of those. These are the co-creators, Professor Lieberman and Professor Patricia Van Horn. They both came for about 4 years to teach here in Israel, and we loved them and loved having them. And Patricia, actually, speaking of trauma, had a fatal stroke while she was teaching in Tel Aviv and never woke up from it. It was flown back to the United States, and about in Israel you can't take out the breathing tubes. It's still not allowed. Some of your friends were there? I was there. I still remember the things. I remember being in the ambulance and hearing, Patricia, Patricia, the people that I'm calling her. And about 20 minutes after they took out her breathing tube in the United States, she died. And so, and she was very, very dear to all of us, a really good friend here. It's based on Selma Freiberg's infant parent psychotherapy, which was built and written about more extensively, I think, around 1980. I remember I was a graduate student in the United States in 1981 when the book came out, Clinical Studies in Infant Mental Health, and it was very exciting. Alicia was a student of hers, and Alicia still says with a very Paraguay accent, and then I thought, what would Selma say? And then I think to myself, Selma is dead. You're going to have to figure it out yourself. That's what we hear all the time. Okay? Its theoretical base is a combination of both psychodynamic theories, developmental psychology, and trauma theory. And it also builds from a lot of tools that we use from cognitive behavioral theory, social learning. And because it's based on free play, although it is manualized, it still gives a lot of freedom for people to be able to do what they want. For instance, the thing we've been hearing about art therapies here or music therapies are easily incorporated into CPP as long as you're working on the various domains that are necessary for it. We know here that the quality of attachment is really the key for a child to be able to develop, so it works on that. Okay, it works, say the assumption is that if the attachment, which is so severely disrupted in even good parenting, okay, parenting really is so disturbed by trauma because when a trauma happens to a child, it happens to his family, and when it happens to his family, it happens to the child. And it's something you just can't get away with and away from at all. And the idea is that parents lose their sense of security of being able to provide a safe space for their children. And this job is to help the parents be people who will be able to give back a sense of security to their children. Okay? And the client is CPP, CPP is the child, okay? But it also is very helpful for parents. And I'll show you a little bit of the efficacy trials later on and see that there were also very good outcomes for mothers in PTSD symptoms and in depression, and not just for children, okay? The role of the parent obviously is very strong here. It's to be able to tell the parent that he will be the one guiding his child and helping his child feel better. And we actually ask permission for everything. You know, we always say, Ima is mom here, or Abba, who is dad. We said, Ima, will you let me tell the child about what happened here, there, or the other? Or Mommy told me that something happened the other day. Mommy, is it okay for you, or would you like to tell what happened? And so forth. We always, always work with the parents to be able to have them be the figures that are the ones that make the decision. Alicia is also the queen of benevolence. She knows how to take very destructive parental behavior and turn it into benevolent intent. It doesn't mean that she will say that something that is harmful to a child is not harmful. But let's say if there's a big fight in the room about cleaning up toys, then she'll say, and the mother is really enraged at the child, she'll say to the child, your mommy is trying to teach you that it's very important for you to learn how to clean up your toys. That she will always start with a benevolent intent, which is, think about that, how hard that is when we see behavior that is can be so disruptive and so difficult for children. So here's what it looks like. It has a very lengthy, what's called a foundational phase, probably up to about 5 sessions or so with just parents. Okay, and within it, the focus is on building a kind of brit, alliance, right? Alliance with parents and being able to say, this is what we want to do and let's think about it together. It includes, the beginning of it is talking about what happened. Often parents will come with behavior problems and not tie them up as symptoms to trauma. But we will often ask, and that's why every time that a parent comes to us with a small child, we will fill out a form for a screening for trauma events. And we use the TESI, which is the Trauma Event Screening Inventory. Thank you. So, okay, we use the TESI with all of them. Even if a parent comes and says, this is what happened to my child, we know that that there's such a tendency not to talk about trauma, that many times if you don't ask, you will not find out. So with every parent, we go over this, and there's a very strong tendency, what I've learned, for parents and for therapists to minimize and the effects of trauma in their heads and to try to avoid it, because it is extreme. It's a human instinct. It just happens because it's so hard for us to deal with it. So we make ourselves do the TESI with every single family about everything. It starts with accidents, dog bites, illness in the family, abuse, neglect, different kinds of abuse. Okay, and so that we fill that out with every parent. We do also screening of the parent. We use the LSC, which is a life stressors checklist, that we talk about what happened to the parent in his childhood by explaining with a lot of psychoeducation why it's important for us to know this. It's not clear to parents. Why do you want to hear about my life? No, and it's not clear that often we know that what happens in a parent's life as a child is so instrumental in how he becomes a parent and how he deals with things. And I had a mother where I did it, and I said, how was it for you after I did the TESI and the LSC? And she said, I just figured, and she was a very healthy mom. She said, I just figured this out. She goes, what you're talking about, everything you talk about goes around and talks about what's happening to me with my daughter today. You know, her past and the child's past and everything else. We culminate in talking about what the trauma was, what we think the child heard, what was told to the child. Often they don't know what they thought the child would understood and didn't understand. Often if it's something that they don't want to talk to children about, there's a feeling that, or they say he didn't hear it, he doesn't know. The father committed suicide, he doesn't know that. He just knows that the father died. And then we say, okay, if the child's, did anybody talk about it in front of them? What happened during the Shiva, the mourning period? Do you think he may have heard something then? Because parents, again, in domestic violence, it's really big, that the parents will always say he was sleeping, we never fought when he was home. I heard I never shot up drugs when the child was near. He doesn't know that I'm a drug addict. Okay, this tendency for denial is very strong, and we work with it a lot about what we think the child knows, and if we understand that the symptoms of the child are not because he's bad, but because he went through trauma. Okay, and we call that in trauma work, some of you probably didn't know this, we call it changing the focus from what is wrong with you to what happened to you. That's how we want to be able to talk with children as well. Okay, so we say, do you think to the mother, the fact that he is wetting his bed may have to do with that fight that you had with your husband the other night? And she'll say, no, it has nothing to do with that. And then we'll say, well, we know that with psychoeducation, that often children know a lot more than we think they do. And often they respond to things like that by bedwetting and other symptoms as well. Okay? We finish by thinking to ourselves, what happened to this family? What was they were like before? What they want to get to? What the parents want to tell the children, are able to tell children? And then by the way, have one meeting, if there are two parents, assessment meeting with the parent and the child together to see their interaction as well. And then we invite the child in and to start therapy, and it culminates what we call the triangle. And triangle is a kind of new concept in CPP, but what it is that this is the way that we tell the child why he's come to therapy. Okay, and we say, we start with what happened to you. Okay, it moves to, now you're feeling this way, you have symptoms. Okay, this is in the first therapy session with the child. Okay, and here we really want to teach ourselves how to help you feel better. So we might say, your mommy told me that you were at home when your mommy and daddy had a big fight and your daddy beat your mommy up. And we'll say, we've already asked the mother if we can use the words that we're using. And there was a lot of blood. And the police came and they took your daddy with handcuffs away. And mommy says that you were so, so scared. And it was so terrible. And ever since then, I'm moving over to the symptoms, she says it's really hard for you to fall asleep at night. And it's really, really hard for you to say goodbye to her when you go to kindergarten in the morning. And it must be so hard, it must be so scary for you. And your mommy and I want to be here with you, and we're going to play, and we're going to talk, and we're going to try to find ways to help you feel better. Okay? That's the introduction of therapy to a child. It's very counterintuitive to all the psychodynamic play therapists that I know in Israel who say, let's just let him feel at home and feel comfortable in the relationship, and then we'll bring up or he'll bring it up himself, which usually doesn't work that well. Okay, here you bring and also we bring toys that are, that relate to the trauma. So we will bring police cars. Doctor's kit is absolutely mandatory for every child anyway, but for small children who've gone through medical trauma, or children that have been injured, or their parents have been injured. I have a little girl whose father was killed in the army. The doctor's kit and what happens to her body is a huge, huge issue for her all the time. A dollhouse with the right combination of figures in the house, okay, that they'll be able to play. If we have the right color dolls, it's also very, very nice. Not just to have white dolls in a dollhouse. Depends on what you can find. And then we bring those things, and that's along with some caretaking toys, such as dishes and dolls and bottles and all the things and creative things. And this is the place where there's really so much ability. Yes?
Go back to that autobiography. We cannot read what's...
It says up on the top, what happened to you.
Yeah.
Here is how you're feeling and your symptoms. And here we will help you by playing or by talking. Okay? Your mommy and I, your daddy and I, and so forth. Okay? The domains, I'm going to go through this really quickly because I have safe care still to talk about and not much time. But the domains that we're talking, we use a lot of free play and bringing toys. We don't have an agenda, we just have the toys there, okay, that children can choose to use or not. Okay? We want to, one of the really big goals in trauma is to help people enjoy themselves again. So we really promote a sense of enjoyment. And if I have a little girl who makes couscous and meatballs and this kind of soup and that kind of soup, then I will say to her, wow, where did you learn how to make all that delicious food? And she'll say, mommy makes them. I said, mommy? You know how to make couscous? So it sounds like your mommy's such a good cook. Whenever we can say something enjoyable or good, you want to say it. That's, I think, a really important thing in life and in therapy in general, is that we so don't focus on positive. And we're always focusing on problems. And we don't want to do that, okay? We use a lot of psychoeducation for both children and for adults to talk about what the appropriate developmental expectations we have from small children. You know, children often are so worried that their mommy and daddy will be angry at them. Or sometimes they get really, one of the big things is that children cry when they're in distress, not because they want to be mean or to get back at you for all kinds of things. Okay, we want to be able to help parents and children understand what happened to them. Is that it's so clear that it's really hard for a little boy not to use his hands and to fight when he saw his daddy fighting with his mommy, and he said, I better be strong like my daddy. Okay, that's an example, but we want to normalize that through psychoeducation. Okay, we want to model protective behavior. We often see that children who have been traumatized and their parents, and this is very clear, a lot with domestic abuse, have a very, very not, it's actually a brain issue, a very warped sense of what is safe and what is not. And we have little children climbing up bookcases, running into the street, running out of the room, and parents that are not as protective as they can. And we want to really encourage that feeling of safety, which is really the first thing that needs to be restored in trauma, okay? And it also has a lot of emotional support of parents who we will meet by themselves when we need to talk about big people things and not things that we talk about with their children, okay? And helping, it's a real social work model. That's from Selma Freiberg. Selma Freiberg started out as a social worker and then turned into a then she for some reason turned into a psychoanalyst. I don't understand what she was thinking, but she was really, really into concrete help as well for people. Okay, so we do a lot of work, a lot of court work as well. We're working with police, working with courts, and so forth. Okay, and the big thing of obviously is making a trauma narrative. Okay, one of the big things that we want to do is when it comes to be pieced together. Okay, and along with it, we think about what we know about young children and how they interpret their lives and what they're scared of. Children always think that things happened because they were bad, because it may have been their fault. Okay, we will often say, for instance, a father that died will say, you know, your daddy died and he can't come back anymore and he did not want to leave you. And he's sad that he's dead. Okay, we use a combination of in the present and forth because he didn't want to leave you and it's not your fault that he got so sick. Because often children will say, I yelled at him before he died or things like that could happen. Okay? Its empirical base here is that the following, it's registered in the United States National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs. It had, I think, 4 large efficacy trials, if I'm not mistaken, and these are the symptoms that have been improved. As child PTS symptoms, maternal PTS symptoms, and child behavior problems, children's representational models, attachment security, and other maternal health symptoms such as depression. Okay? It's taught over a year and a half. It's a long program. We take therapists that have a post-master's degree with a number of years of experience afterwards. It really, we did a training the trainers program where after Alicia and Patricia taught, we took 27 of the top people from our first 3 cohorts and turned them into trainers. So it's now in English. And it was a once a year long program, but we see that people don't feel they can do it comfortably after a year. In the United States, they do it for a year and a half, so we've changed it to a year and a half. Okay? Safe care. I'm going to move right along. Okay? That's a regulation. Talking about regulation. Okay. Safe care is also for young children, 0 to 5. But it's a different story altogether. It works on preventing recurrence, in the United States, recurrence of abuse, recidivism in turning to child protection. They were all children that at one point came to the attention of child protection, were given safe care, and they checked who were reported again. Here we use it as a preventive program, okay? And it is supposed to help really reduce abuse and neglect. It's in the home with a home visitor who is trained, and she does not have to be a professional. And she has to be good with parents, or he has to be, we have also men here in Ashdod. He has to be good with parents and not be very judgmental and be able to make a relationship and so forth. Okay, and it is manualized to such an extent that you could pretty much read the manual to the parents. That's American evidence-based treatment. It's very, very different. John Lutzker is the creator of Safe Care from Georgia State University. It has 4 units, but we use 3 of them all the time, which are parent-infant or parent-child interaction, where we have to have the child health care, and home safety. Okay, I'll tell you a little bit about each one of them. Okay, each unit is about 6 sessions, so we're talking maybe 18 sessions altogether here, or 20 sessions, okay? See what they say, the opening of the session, you say hello. That's what the manual tells you to do. Okay, so say hello and ask how, we call it seviv manishma in Hebrew. We say, how are you doing? How has the week been this week? Okay? And then we talk about what we're going to do today, and then we go over what happened last night because people are practicing the skills that they've been taught. Okay? For every one of those, home health, safety, child health, home safety, and parent-child or parent-infant interaction, there's an assessment session first where we go in and they go in and talk about what's happening or see the state of the house or see what parents know. 5 minutes? Okay. And so forth. Okay? And every one of them this is their model, that you explain what you're going to do, you model the appropriate behavior, you have the parent practice it while you're there, and you give them feedback on how they did. Okay? I'm going to tell you just about what they do. The parent-child and the parent-infant interaction are what they sound like. They're to help interaction. Okay? To encourage interaction with infants and with children. Okay? For infants, there's a big emphasis on gazing, talking, touching, and smiling to babies and how important it is to them. Okay? For toddlers, they often talk about how to plan an activity and what to do if your child does not cooperate. Okay? The idea of consequences. Mommy's gonna go talk on the phone for 5 minutes, and you're gonna play. And if you play nicely, then we'll do something together when you finish whatever it is. And if you don't play nicely, then we'll just have to clean up the toys, and we won't be able to do what it is that we wanted to do. That's what they teach parents how to do. Okay, the healthcare is a decision making where they basically want to help parents decide when to treat at home and how to do. There's a whole health manual, a very large one. There's one for people that know how to read, and one in pictures for people who don't know how to read. Okay, we use the one to translate into Hebrew. Don't even get me started. There's so much material, we use the one with the pictures. So we would have much less to write and to translate. And when to call a doctor and when to visit an emergency room. That's what they tell, and they give scenarios to parents. Okay, your child, you see that blood is gushing from his leg. What do you do? Okay, do you treat it at home, or an earache, or an accident, or a child faints, or a child has a fever that's, let's say, 38. What would you do? And then parents have to figure out what it is that they're supposed to do during that amount of time. Okay, and the last one is home safety, where they go in with iPhones in the United States and take pictures of the rooms. And at the beginning, with parents' permission, obviously, okay? And they talk about hazards. A hazard is anything that is above the reach of the tallest child in the home, okay? So you have to have the child there one time, so he can go like this, on his tiptoes, to see what he can get to. And they talk about reducing filth and clutter and all kinds of hazards and so forth, okay? Problem solving is for parents that often you come and you can't talk about these things because they're so overwhelmed with problems of everyday life. So there's an extra problem solving one that you can also use. The results here are mind-blowing. What I always look at, I don't understand what a lot of this says, but I do understand that it says here, the ROI analysis suggests a $14 return for every $1 invested in safe care, which is like unheard of. We said, no, John, that can't be true. And they swear that this is true. Okay? And there is also a 40, there have been reports, this is in Oklahoma. Okay, just in Oklahoma statewide trial, that they prevented 64 to 104 re-reports to child protection. Okay? In Israel, Ashdod, the municipality of Ashdod, social workers took it. Okay, we sent 3 trainers to the United States, social workers, experienced social workers. They came back, they learned how to be, they did it themselves. They learned how to be coachers, trainers. They now have about 14 of them. It's going very slowly. Implementation takes a really long time because the trainers don't, the new home visitors aren't, some of them aren't as good as they should be, or one has a baby, or the parents they had a hard time getting referrals, but it's getting there very slowly. And all of the materials were translated into Hebrew, and that was really, really hard work. That's all. Okay?